Through the My Toyota store, you can enjoy hassle-free online buying for your Toyota genuine parts and all make parts. With an electronic parts catalog containing over 400,000 Toyota genuine parts, all accessible through a model serial search, so you can take the guesswork out of identifying the correct part for your equipment. Get started today at shop.toyotaforklift.com. That's shop.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be rejoined by a fellow podcaster now, Dave Gulas, over at EasyDC 3PL, and also a host of the Beyond Fulfillment podcast. And the last time I talked to Dave was at Home Delivery World last year in 2023. He was just kind of getting going in the 3PL space, and then shortly after decided to do his own podcast too as well. And he's just been growing within the 3PL space, the logistics industry. His podcast has been growing over the last year. So figured it's time to bring him back and see how it's been going over the last year or so. So Dave, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
Definitely. Good to see you too. Happy to get you back on here. So I guess I gave a little explanation of some of the things that you've been up to just from, seeing out in the atmosphere, I guess, and listening to your podcast as well, which has turned out really well and definitely growing. So I guess tell us from your perspective, what are you up to? What do you have your hands into these days? What's going on with you?
Oh, man. Yeah, like you said, just continuing to grow the 3PL and, manage all the different aspects of that and continuing to grow the podcast. And like you said, too, right, Home Delivery World, that was my first experience with anything having to do with the podcast. And you actually were a big reason I started my own, because I was just getting into content and posting and all the social media stuff. And so when I recorded for your podcast, you gave us the video. Yeah. My team started posting shorts, right? Just little clips of the episode. And I was pleasantly surprised. It got a lot of engagement and the video did really, really well. And that kind of got the wheels turning in my mind and eventually kind of inspired me to start my own, just because of another reason too, all the conversations I had on this founder journey. I learned so much and I thought, wow, if I could put these in a public forum, other people could learn, it could help the guests, it could help me. So it's kind of how it all happened. And yeah, I didn't have any experience and I just had the idea and I said, let's just do it. And we started doing it. And here we are.
Nice. Very nice. And yeah, I mean, it's been really cool to see you do that. And I remember you talking about it when you were going to start it. I think we kind of met a little bit to talk about it and, what you were thinking and stuff. And it's really interesting to see how that's developed. And I love the approach that you've taken to it as well, because it's called Beyond Fulfillment, right? You're not just necessarily talking about the fulfillment side of things, but you're talking about all these aspects of business. And it's kind of, I can almost see like how your journey is going in terms of building your 3PL up, EasyDC, and how that relates to the conversations that you're also having on the podcast as you're connecting with these people and expanding your network. So I'm curious, I mean, as you've started that, I'm curious, like what have you learned about maybe having the podcast, but also just kind of in general terms? I mean, maybe having like more of a personal brand in a sense on the logistics side of the industry, and what has that kind of done for you? What kind of doors has it opened? What kind of feedback do you have from experiencing that now for, I guess, a little over a year it's been, right?
Yeah, well, so when I first got into logistics, I was practically invisible online. I came from the pharmaceutical industry, and a part of it that was very niche, to where you really didn't need to be on social media to be successful in that realm, where everyone kind of knew who the customers were, and there was just a lot of business done, I guess, outside of social media. And when I got into logistics, I quickly realized that people need to be able to find you, right? Because they need to know who you are. And when they're ready to buy, you need to be on their mind. So I quickly started building the brand and getting out there on social media and posting content. And, like you said, the podcast, when I started that, it immediately helped the business in every way in terms of helping us convert leads, helping us get a lot more leads. And the one thing too that I've been able to really lean in is part of like kind of my strengths and attributes is just the ability to be disciplined and consistent. So, I started and I just kept going and I never stopped. And even though I had no experience, I really didn't know at all what I was doing in the beginning. I just kept doing it. And the more you do it, the better you get. And, I realized too, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to get it right. You just have to get it going and continue to improve and adjust along the way. And when you do that, the more you do it, you'll improve. You'll start to develop that unconscious competence, and that fear and that anxiety that you have in the beginning just goes away. The more comfortable you come in being out there online and recording podcasts or being guests on podcasts. So I just kept doing all that, and it's worked really well. It's helped our online search immensely, and we get a lot of leads where people just find us online. And you yourself know how many 3PLs there are out there. It's helped. It's just helped in every way. So I'm glad I did it, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great to hear, and I would definitely echo that as well. Because when I started my podcast too, same thing. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of podcasting or even promoting myself in any way or getting out there on the social media aspect or anything of that nature. I was just a warehouse manager at the time and just wanted to learn more about the industry, and it seemed like a way to potentially do that. So I'm curious. That consistency obviously pays off. I think when you're doing any kind of content creation or anything in that manner, right? Maybe the beginning, you don't necessarily get big results or you don't see those things, but it compounds over time, right? And you see those dividends. I think you're talking about that where, it's increased your presence in searching, it's increased the leads, conversions because of this presence and creating this brand around everything. So, I think kind of in a sense, you could say that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too. You could say that the secret is out a little bit in terms of content creation being a good vehicle to prospect and bring potential leads in and open doors to connections that maybe otherwise you wouldn't necessarily have as easy of a time connecting to. So I guess for people out there that are trying to maybe figure that out. Maybe it's, they just want to post more on LinkedIn, or maybe they want to do their own kind of show or have some idea for something to, create some content out there for the industry or whatever industry it is. What advice would you give them as someone that's, been consistent like this and been able to, make some traction in this way? What would be the biggest piece of advice you would give them?
I talk to a lot of people, and it's funny too, because I've talked to numerous people that when you look at their company and, what they've done in business, way more successful, and they've talked about wanting to start a podcast, but they just haven't been able to do it. And the biggest thing that I think stops people is just the fact they just never start. And, there's this myth of perfection, or all these things have to be right, or you have to have all this, a certain software, or certain equipment, or whatever. I literally started on my laptop with a free Zoom account with no microphone and just having Zoom. And I said that it's a podcast. And, I just kept doing that, and that's right. And, you continue to get better, improve over time. And then you see you can add this and do that, and we'll improve this. And, we started kind of backwards, where we started only on YouTube. And I didn't even get on all the audio channels till just a few months ago. For the first 6 months, we were only on YouTube. So many things kind of weren't done right, or maybe we're just kind of thrown together, but just that there's power in just taking action and continuing to stay in motion. So I would say for anyone that wants to do it, or has these ambitions, that the most important thing you can do is just start, and not be afraid of making mistakes, not be afraid of looking like a beginner or whatever, because ultimately, right, we're all right? We're all trying to grow our brand. We're all trying to grow our businesses. And it's like, wherever I am, you might see me at a show, you might see me anywhere, at the store, online, whatever, right? I'm still me. So what does it matter, right? You just get out, you get online and you be yourself, and it is, right? We're all people, right? And people want to do business with people. So I think the more you can get out there and let people get to know you, you'll realize that, that fear is all just in your mind. If you can just take action and push past it, that'll put you way, way ahead of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great point there, because I think, so many times people get caught in their mind. And I know, like, I've talked to several people who are like, oh, I want to post more on LinkedIn, or, I want to get out there more on social media, but they're, very concerned about the polishedness of what they're doing. Right. But I think, it's a great example. I mean, myself too, like when I started, like, I was just using like basic stuff and no idea what I was doing, but, just creating some consistency, like you mentioned in there, and how you started to just using Zoom and laptop microphone, just get started and just get out there. Like you get those reps in there, right? You get that practice, and then you're able to build upon that, and over time, like you can see that the consistency will pay off. But I think that's the most important takeaway, right? Is just do, right? Like just get started, just do something. So I mean, talk to us a little bit about, growing the podcast, learning through the podcast, building this out. And then at the same time, you're building this 3PL as well. And as you mentioned earlier, coming from a pharmaceutical side of things and now getting into this e-commerce fulfillment that you decided to start. Tell us a little bit about, how the 3PL is going, what you've seen, what you've learned, maybe things to avoid potentially if you're trying to start a 3PL, like, what's been happening with that, and how are things going?
We'll be back after a quick break.
When it comes to systems, you want something that will start showing results fast. You're looking for a tool that can enable your 3PL or warehouse to get to the next level. So why wait? That's why Carton Cloud provides supported, fast onboarding that can have your WMS up and running in hours, not months. Jump into Carton Cloud's easy-to-use workflows for all of your services, including cross-docking, serialized inventory tracking, e-commerce order fulfillment, and more. This software is built by logistics people for logistics people, and those logistics people are standing by to help train you and support you so that you can be successful with your customer. With 24/7 real-time reporting and free online training, you need to check out Carton Cloud for your operation. Take the next step in your operation by heading to cartoncloud.com/free-demo or click the link in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, things are going very well, right? And it's a learning curve, and it went from, in the very beginning, having a hard time getting anyone to, listen or take you seriously or give you a chance, right? I remember that in the very beginning. And then the podcast created a whole lot of growth, but yet I was still very inexperienced. And I was, and I've talked to several other 3PL owners that said, yeah, we all go through that. I was kind of chasing every deal.
Yeah.
Right. And, I brought accounts in that really weren't the right fit for us. And so we're transitioning away from some of those and just really learning who we are as a 3PL and really just being firm about, only bringing in the right accounts that really align with what we want and what we're able to, the areas we're able to perform best in. So it's truly like a win-win. So, just working through that and actually getting some bigger accounts and some real brands and just continuing to learn and grow. But, our guiding principle too has always just been, helping the customer, find an affordable, reliable fulfillment solution. And, just like, to use, and I'm sure you've heard the analogy, like when you're creating content is like, you're not making this for everybody, you're making this for somebody. Right. So, just trying to, that's the same thing with the, not only with the content, but with the customers, really just trying to focus on who our ideal customer is, who we're best suited to serve. And, even just when we have those customers that are like, wow, thank you so much. You've done such an incredible job. You've really helped my business. right? And just those are the experiences that make it all worthwhile, and just really trying to, refine our approach and just get more of the accounts that really align with who we're best, suited to serve.
Yeah, interesting there. And I think it is like, it's such a challenge, right? When you start a business and like you said, like you want to chase every deal, right? Because you're like, oh, like I got to make this thing work. I got to make money, right? And it's interesting, for you to hear like now, like, okay, we did chase some deals and some deals were, not the best fit for our business. And now we're transitioning out of that and we're refining and we're able to, continue to improve upon ourselves and be able to do that. So, I mean, I'm curious, you talk about, you're adjusting and I guess defining what your ICP is in there and like what your ideal customer is. I mean, what are you really kind of focused on? Like what types of products or what types of brands are you looking to work with?
Yeah, just really smaller items, mainly e-commerce, like Shopify based e-commerce and smaller items, such as beauty and several beauty accounts and just, other home goods and just smaller items like that. And getting away from maybe bigger, bulkier stuff or just channels that really aren't really the best fit for us. So, I mean, that's really it. And, again, in the beginning, when you don't know what you don't know, sometimes too, like when you're having trouble getting leads or you're having trouble, finding customers, sometimes you get in this scarcity mode where you'll chase after ones that aren't the right fit. But then you realize too, there's so much business out there. And if you just stay true to your areas of strength, you realize there's so much business out there that you don't have to chase it when you just kind of are firm about where you should be, that a lot more deals that are right will come to you, and we've seen that as particularly in the last several months.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great advice there. I mean, I think that's one thing too. It's interesting. Like I've heard a couple of people say this before, like 3PLs, like, oh, aren't 3PLs like competitors in these things? And in a sense, like, yes, but there's so much business out there for everybody, right? And not every company is the right fit for the 3PLs. And, I've been lucky to be in some communities with some 3PLs and know some other 3PLs owners as well. And, they all like kind of share that philosophy and they're all like very willing to, I guess, share with each other, like if they get something that's not a right fit for them and, pass that on. So I'm curious, I mean, I know you've been networking like crazy, not only through the podcast, but just in general, the industry and the space. I mean, what's your impression or how do you view like this community of 3PLs that's out there? I mean, you mentioned that, there are like so many 3PLs out there, but as you've kind of entered into this space, what's your impression of the community itself?
Yeah, I mean, 3PLs and really logistics as a whole, and I've been pleasantly surprised because coming from pharma, I mean, the pharma industry is very cutthroat. Yeah. It's very competitive. It's very, you know what I mean? It's like night and day from logistics. Logistics is so collaborative and people are so much, just more friendly and just more apt to partner on a deal. But you see that now because the supply chain is so big and so complex and there's so many different areas where you need an expert. And you can't do everything yourself. So we're continually having to partner with other aspects, whether it's freight forwarders or, there's a freight component or maybe other aspects within the supply chain where we need a good partner. And then, right, we're in Kentucky primarily and, numerous people need a West Coast location. So I've got partners on the West Coast or other areas too. I mean, I have partners nationwide where somehow a lead will come to me, but they need to be in this area. And, I've got a short list of 3PL owners that I've referred business to that I know are going to do a good job. So I'm continually in touch with others if it's not the right fit for me, but, someone else can help them. I mean, I just had a call this morning with someone, they needed food grade in Chicago, and that's not me, but I know a guy and had a great call and everything looks very positive initially. So I'm always just trying to, if I can't help somebody, I still want to help the customer through my network.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. And I think the logistics community, like as a whole, like you said, is super helpful and always willing to collaborate for the most part. And I think that's a really great thing to be able to see because there is so many connections, I guess, within the supply chain, even though supply chain is so huge and logistics business is so huge, there's so much opportunity out there. It's still kind of a small world, I guess, in a sense, in terms of, how everybody kind of knows each other in some different degree. And now, I guess, speaking of the logistics side, right? So the last time we talked, you're just kind of getting into EasyDC, the 3PL. And then since I was listening to, I think you were on Blythe, Everything is Logistics podcast, right? And you mentioned that now you're also a freight broker too with SPI Logistics. So you kind of gone like all in on this thing, man. You got 3PL, like podcasts about like fulfillment, and now freight brokerage too. So tell us a little bit about that part as well and how that kind of came about.
Yeah. So, I mean, we would bring in, e-commerce customers or 3PL customers, and then they would say, hey, I have some pallets that I need to bring in, or they would need to move them elsewhere. Can you help me? And I noticed too, like a big reason that many companies come to us, right, is to outsource their logistics, because they want to focus on other areas of their business, and they don't want to think about logistics too much. They want to, an expert to handle it. So they would ask me to help them move freight, and I would go to other freight brokers, and a couple times too, it was just not a good experience for the customer. And I was just really irked by that. And I was like, man, how can I fix this? Because, they're my customer, their products are in our warehouse, but, they're not having a good experience. And around that time, I was talking to Joe Lynch, and he said, hey, have you heard about these guys, SPI? They've got this agent program. They offer all the back office support where you just, basically handle the sales aspect and whatnot. And so he introduced me to them, and I became an agent, and it's been great. I mean, they have a phenomenal system, very agent friendly. You can have someone on the phone to help you within like 30 seconds, and they give you all the tools you need to, to run a successful freight agency. And since then, numerous customers, and then many outside of our 3PL even have needed freight services, and I've been able to help them out with that. And just learning about the business. And, I've been able to partner up with other longtime agents too that have a lot of expertise and really can help teach me about the areas that, I wouldn't have known about moving, LTL or truckload or whatever it is. So again, speaking of logistics, it's, SPI has a phenomenal community, and everyone's very willing to help each other out. And it's just been a great experience. So that's another area where we can offer value to our clients.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that's fantastic, because, you recognize that not necessarily a problem for you in a sense with, your clients having problems with freight, but you're like, well, this is a bad experience for my client. Like, this is going to become my problem too, right? So let me take this on and let me address this to make sure that, my client is having the best experience that they can possibly have, whether we're fulfilling their orders or whether, we need to provide them with some freight services or help them out in that sense. And I think that's a true testament of someone that wants to be like a true partner, right? Because I think, in some other scenarios, like some companies might just be like, well, I don't do freight, so that's not really like my problem, right, in a sense. And I think you're taking it that extra step and going that extra mile to be able to provide some of those comprehensive services that really make a true partnership. So really interesting to kind of hear here, Dave. I mean, what you've been up to and how you've grown since the last time we've talked it's really great to see. And the podcast is fantastic. I listen almost every week, I will say, but, really some interesting conversations going on there. And I'm curious, as we wrap up here, might put you on the spot for a second, but so far in the podcast, who has been your favorite conversation, or if somebody was going to go and check out the Beyond Fulfillment podcast, what episode would you recommend maybe they go to first?
Oh man. Well, so there's one in particular, and actually if you go there and you're not subscribed, you'll see it. It's actually pinned to the, to the channel, but it's with Brian Esposito, and he's a lifelong entrepreneur, and he's got an incredible story, but he basically, he was building a business, and he had a lot of the wrong people around him at the time. And he got actually hit by a drunk driver and injured very badly to where he couldn't work. And all the people around him kind of just left him high and dry, and his businesses like fell apart. He went like millions of dollars in debt. I mean, just like terrible, right? And, he came back from that. He finally got better. He started digging himself back out of the hole. He didn't file bankruptcy, and he came back from that and, paid everyone back eventually, even though it took a while. And, he's got equity now in 110 plus companies. And he's partnered with some real like business heavyweight titans, like Anthony Scaramucci and Brandon Feigl. And he's CEO of Diamond Lake Minerals, which is like they had a phenomenal stock turnaround. So, you can look up his story, but that's kind of what the podcast is based about too, is like the entrepreneurial journey. And, so many times people will see a business owner and they'll like, oh, it's so glamorous. So that's great. But, there's a story. Everyone's got a story, right? And so many times too, if people aren't kind of in that position, you don't know like the drama and the pain and the heartache and the dark nights of the soul that everyone goes through. So it's really that's kind of like the joy of the podcast, is hearing those stories and hearing how people kind of overcame difficulty and all the problems that came their way, and they can still have a smile. But hearing a story like Brian's is just, you hear that and it's like, wow, you think you have problems. And then you hear something like that, right? And it's very inspirational. So that's really what I aim to do with the podcast, is just kind of spotlight everyone's story and help inspire other entrepreneurs and, just get those messages out there.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I listened to that episode actually, and I remember now that you mentioned it, and definitely a great episode, very interesting story there. And it's kind of like the old saying, right? Your overnight success that took like 10 years, right? Definitely a very interesting story there. So definitely check out the Beyond Fulfillment podcast from Dave here. And Dave, if people are interested in 3PL services or freight services, all these different things that you're offering, what's the best way to get in touch with you or find out more information?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can actually go to davegoulas.com, and that has links to everything I do with Easy DC, with the Freight by Dave, with the podcast. And I got links to every podcast I've been on. So yours will be up there too.
All right.
But yeah, I'm not hard to find.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So Dave, thank you once again for coming back on the show and joining me today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.